I'm endlessly fascinated and curious about the world around us, about business, about politics, about the arts, about culture, developments, social issues, and the people. Most importantly, about the people that are shaping our future. Every night, I get the opportunity to have conversations, to dive into conversations with thought leaders, with change makers, entrepreneurs, politicians, and everyday heroes who unpack the ideas and stories that I think matter to all of us. What's the future of our economy? What's the future of our country? How do we build stronger communities? What can we learn from music, theater, sports, politics, the arts? How does policy shape our real lives? What does leadership look like, real leadership in today's environment? If it's interesting and relevant and topical and we're talking about it, you'll hear about it here at 6 o'clock on the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I want to have real conversations, in-depth conversations. These are ideas we're sharing. This is the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. Thanks for joining me. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I've got an interesting gentleman to introduce you to tonight, and a fascinating topic that I think is a real issue. Tony Irwin is the president and CEO of an organization called Rental Housing Canada, RHC. He's also president and CEO of another organization called the Federation of Rental Housing Providers of Ontario, FRPO. And so, both focused on the rental housing business. And we're going to talk a little bit about rental housing. Construction condos are at an all-time low. Some people are thinking that there's an ice age or even worse in construction of condominiums. And certainly there's a huge inventory of condos in the market. So lots of companies, lots of developers are switching to rental housing. And is that good or is that bad? Tony Irwin, what do you think?
Brian, great to be with you. I would say, we are seeing. I guess to answer your question directly, we need more purposeful rental housing built. That's really what's important in this conversation. And so, if it's something that those who have built condo, for example, are able to make that pivot and build purposeful rental, then great. I would just say that from certainly the conversations I've had, it is a tough thing to transition to. It's a very different kind of economic model. So certainly it's something that we have heard is being explored. But I would say that it's something that you have to have the resilience and have the strength and frankly the financial sort of wherewithal to do it. But if there are people who can do it, then I think that's a great thing.
Why is it difficult? This may be a silly question, but they're both houses in the sky. Why is it different? Why is it a difficult job to convert from a condominium to a purposeful rental business?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge with it, of course, is that in the condominium business, you're selling 70% or that range of the units before you begin construction. You've got that money to help you finance the project. Obviously, purposeful rental, you do not. So you need a lot more equity up front, and the returns look very different. Building a purposeful rental building, you may not turn a profit for the first 10 years, maybe more. Whereas obviously condominiums, you're being able to pre-sell the majority of the units. That just makes for a very different economic picture. And so requirements to be able to build the two are different. And of course, one is because it's all the pre-sales and it's a ownership product. You're in and out. Whereas purposeful rental, this is a long-term play. Members in my associations who are in this business want to be in it for decades. It's in many cases, family businesses have been in it for a long time. That's what they want to do, but you have to obviously recognize what it means to be in that kind of a business model. They're just two very different things for those reasons.
You've talked about how the economics are different. Are the products different? Are the boxes the same?
Well, I mean, without getting into, I'm not, an architect or have all of that sort of experience, but in terms of touring buildings, which I do, touring purposeful rental buildings, newer product that I, have a chance to go in and look at now looks very much the same. If you went into two buildings that were condominium versus new rental, I think you'd be hard pressed to be able to pick the difference if it was the blind taste test. Amenities are very similar. Finish is very similar. Really, it's while there may be some differences in terms of building envelope, perhaps. Again, I'm not an expert at that, but as a consumer walking in and looking at the two products, they are very similar. They do look because purposeful rental buildings of today are not the same as they were, in the 60s and 70s. Nothing to say bad about them. It's just that as we evolve, obviously recognizing what consumers, what residents want in their homes, I would say purposeful rental builders have adapted and are building product that is very much look and feels like condominium.
So I had a gentleman on my show just this past week who said that in the pre-construction condo business, they were selling the
Yeah.
math, but in the purpose-built rental building, you're selling a home. Because the vast majority of people that were buying pre-construction condos were just buying investment. We're thinking that they would flip it, and or they would rent it out. So it was an investment,
Yeah.
and it was all
Right.
based on the math, the expectation that
Right.
appreciation would be such that you could flip it. But
Right.
when you're actually renting an apartment to somebody, you're renting somewhere where they're going to live. So you're selling the home. So one is selling the math, the other one is selling the home. What do you think of that, sir?
It's interesting. I hadn't thought of it like that, but I mean, when we go back to the 1980s, when we're talking now about MERB and MERB, existed then, when things like the MERB program and capital gains capital gains was introduced and MERB was stopped. You can look at charts from that time that show the purposeful rental construction going up and up and up, and then you see it sort of fall off a cliff. And that's because the economics to build purposeful rental no longer made sense. So what happened? Well, it's not, it's not as if nothing came along in its place. What we saw, of course, was the emergence of the condominium construction, which became the de facto rental market in places like Toronto and Vancouver. So, from that perspective, that's kind of what, because as we spoke about earlier, the economics for that did make sense. So, thinking about it the way you have put it, it is an interesting perspective, and it rings true to me in a certain sense because I do think that's obviously what did happen. We needed a replacement, or I shouldn't say we needed, due to policy changes and otherwise interest rates and other things that happened. Obviously, and I would say at that time, governments, obviously did not continue to or didn't think that prioritizing purposeful rental or supporting it was what they wanted to do. Numerous reasons for that, I'm sure. But because of that, or as a result of some of those decisions and factors at the time, then we saw the condominium market become what it did. And to your point, we relied on a lot of investors to buy those units. Yes, they then became rentals, which we need. But I do think what you're saying, there's some. I think history would suggest that there's some truth in that, definitely.
So if a lot, and some people think it's actually a majority of these condos have been bought by investors that are going to then turn around and rent them out, is there a
Mhm.
difference between your landlord being someone that owns the whole building, a purposeful rental, versus your landlord being someone that owns one or two or six condos?
Well, I mean, it's certainly from my perspective in terms of the hats I wear, the companies and members I represent, who are professional, developers and managers and operators of purposeful rental. Of course, I'm biased towards them. It's not to say that someone who owns an individual unit or is renting out their, a single family home or other types of rental accommodation aren't good. For sure, there are, but I would always sort of point to professional managers, operators in the business, for many years, have that long-term view and really see their buildings as communities. So it is building in a sort of entire community with the amenities, really wanting to create an environment where the residents are like family. It is their home, as you said, and they want to create that sort of environment where people, want to be there, enjoy their accommodation, enjoy, relationships with other residents who are there in the building, and it really is that kind of a community. And I think we do see that quite often across Canada and our members, buildings and communities. So I'm biased towards that. It's not to say that there aren't good in all. There, of course, is. But I think there's an advantage to living somewhere that is professionally managed by a company that's that has that experience and frankly is committed to the for the long term to the success of that and the happiness and enjoyment of the community that they have built.
So community is interesting. I I ended up interviewing the CEO of Fitzrovia, a fairly significant player in the purpose-built rental business, and
Yes, he is.
he was effectively disagreeing with what you said that the product is very similar. He was saying that the amenities that he produces and provides in his rental are far larger and far more significant than you'd have in a condo. And one of the reasons why he said is because you want to build that community. Because he said that what you want is people to stay longer than a year. And so the way that you get them to stay longer than a year is that you make them get some friends, make some friends and associates
Yep.
within their community. And the way you do that is through the amenities. So he said the amenities in a condo are like the icing on a cake to try to sell the cake. So it's there for to make it look good, but you may not actually ever use it. But the amenities in a rental are to make you build community, and so the amenities are very different. And then he went on and he said that the suite sizes tend to be
Mhm.
larger, that the number of bedrooms tend to be greater, that the mix of suites in a typical condo building would be studios and ones, while the mix in a typical rental building would be more ones, twos, and threes, because they're more family oriented and wanting people to stay longer period versus investor oriented. And then he, I think, finally
Yep.
said that the quality of the workmanship, the finishes, the construction materials, etc., are appreciably different, just because in a condo building, the developer has built and then has sold as soon as the place opens, versus in the
Yep.
rental, as you said, the landlord's going to be reselling, re-renting every year for 10, 15, 20
Mhm.
years. What do you think of that?
Yep.
Is he right, or is he just giving me some smoke to market this company?
Listen, I'm not going to take on Adrian Roca. He is, phenomenal leader, visionary, has a great company and great product. So I'm not going to take issue with any of what he has said. He's more knowledgeable in some of this than I am. I think my sort of point to all this is people have a certain image in their mind of what they think purposeful rental buildings are, and I think a lot of that is based on sort of attitudes and perspectives that no longer represent what's being built today. And I think that's to some extent natural. As we evolve, there are a lot of things, cars, lots of things you can speak to that aren't the same now as they were, several decades ago. So I think part of that is now is kind of not surprising, but part of it is because people just again have these long held views. They don't maybe go into buildings themselves. They just it's what they kind of hear or see or what they've thought due to some preconceived notion that may not actually accurately reflect what's happening today. So we often talk about, and I've been in some of Adrian's buildings, and they are phenomenal. I'm not, don't have the qualified to speak to the absolute, actually the actual level of finishes and all of that. I would just say that the point I would like to sort of make is that when you go into purposeful rental buildings now, they would surprise a lot of people based on what they think that they would be like due to some of the things I was just talking about. If they walk into a building now, I think they would be quite surprised at what they would see. It's not the apartment building of of yesteryear, of decades ago, and people have those images and perceptions. I would say to people, go look at one, go see one, because they are very different, and they do have that they are trying to create those communities that Adrian talked about, and I think that's very much what I see, whether it's in Toronto or Halifax or Vancouver or Montreal. I've seen buildings and other, and I'm saying big cities. We have members who build in tertiary markets, smaller communities that don't build in large cities, and because that's their business model, that's what they do, and they also build product that is, I think, a lot different than what many would assume it would be like. So
I think
that's really
this
the point that I was trying.
I think this branding or positioning is important. I've been to community meetings where the communities are negative toward purpose-built rental and positive to condominiums, and I think they think because there's
Yes.
going to be a higher income, higher value, nicer people that are moving into something they own, and people that move into a place they rent aren't going to take care of the facility, their suite, their community, their building as well. Um, is that true?
When I go to buildings and speak to members, they have residents who've lived there 10, 20, 30 years. They take tremendous pride in where they live. And yes, they have their own unit, but they also are concerned about the communal space that everyone uses. And so I really do see that, and I do believe that certainly is the case. People they really do uh, take care in where they're living. And I think we know NIMBYism is alive and well. We know that. We know that there are still people who, again, hold perceptions, property values, all things you've talked about. I hear it still now, and I really, of course, fundamentally believe that's not true. We really need to change attitudes and perceptions to say having a purposeful rental building in your community is going to be a positive. I mean, we need housing. I think that's pretty clear. And having a development like this, yes, it has to still meet certain, it has to be public input, and we have to ensure that, that it fits, in terms of the floor plate and fits where you want to build it. But, these attitudes that it's just bad on its face just because it is. I think we really need to change that. We really need to shift attitudes that say, and as I think you and I both know, that a lot of European cities where renting is very much accepted. It is a way of life, and I don't think people have the same attitudes. And I really think it would be, we really need to change that in Canada. I think going forward, it's got to be something that people, as I'm looking at my own kids, where are they going to live? I want there to be, quality purposeful rental buildings for them to be able to as options as we need all kinds of housing options, but I want that kind of product to be available because that might be what works best for them. And I'm not looking at it saying this is a bad thing or a negative thing. It's an essential thing, and we need people to be, I think, to come around to the idea that this is not the housing of last resort. It's something that we need to embrace.
We're chatting tonight with Tony Irwin. He's the president and CEO of the Canadian Rental Housing Canada organization. We're talking about rental housing, purpose-built rentals, and we're talking about the housing market. And some people think a housing crisis that we're currently in. We're going to take 2 minutes for a break for some messages and come back with our guest Tony Irwin in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. We're chatting tonight with Tony Irwin of the Rental Housing Canada organization about rental housing, about the housing business. Sir, the statistics this past weekend that came out is that building starts are going to be the lowest they've been in 30 years. That we've got, an ice age in pre-construction condos from a start standpoint, not from necessarily a delivery standpoint. This year and last year are going to be the years of highest deliveries of condominiums in the marketplace. But that starts are something like 60, 70% down from prior years. Condo starts down 95% from prior years. Sales are down dramatically. I understand that condo prices are down dramatically. There's one example of Green Park that was selling in Oakville at $1,200, $1,400 a buildable square foot and wasn't selling, and then reduced it to $625 and sold out. Like that's almost a 50% decrease in selling prices. I understand that rental rates are down 10 to 15% on average. You've got, I just saw today, Benjamin Tall, who is probably one of the foremost economists at CIBC on real estate and housing, coming to a conference that you got coming up in a month or two. What do you think he's going to say? What's going on? What's gone wrong with our housing sector?
Well, Benjamin is great. He speaks at a lot of our functions and events in the industry, as you've pointed out. And so I heard him speak at the Canadian Apartment Investment Conference in Toronto a few weeks ago, and always very interested to hear what Benjamin has to say. He did in that conversation to the attendees there. I remember him remarking that he thought he wasn't sure that the sort of the model of pre-selling 70% or so of condominiums before you put a shovel in the ground is ever going to come back. I mean, you'd have to ask him. He didn't elaborate as to why he thinks that necessarily, but he did make the comment that he's not sure that that's ever going to return. We'll see, what happens down the line. I do think that obviously what's happening in the condominium space, I think will be here for a while before maybe it starts to rebound. But I'm more, as you you've said a purposeful rental guy than I am a condo guy. So what's happening in the purposeful rental space? And so, as I think you've pointed out, and we in our conversations with government, yes, we're still seeing a lot of deliveries, and that's been the case the last couple of years. As I mean, those projects have taken many years to get to this point. They've been in the pipeline 3, 4, 5 years or more. So yes, we're seeing a number of buildings come online, and we saw that last year, and we'll see that this year. What's going to happen in the next couple of years when what's in the pipeline now is done? What's coming after it? Very little. Very little is coming after it. And so that's something that should be concerning to all of us, that we went from a period where we did see, sort of going back to 2018, 2019, after the election before government, they made some changes that did certainly seem to spur on. Interest rates were still low. Some of the policy changes, for example, exemption from rent control for new construction, a few things like that did help to get shovels back in the ground and get construction going. We all know what happened during the pandemic. And since then, there has been this decline. Interest rates, of course, have started coming down, not as much as they should. Benjamin Tal, I think, believes we will continue to see more cuts, maybe one more this year and a few more next year. That will help. But at the end of the day, what has happened? What has happened is government fees and charges. That's what's happened. The rapid, sort of eye-popping escalation of government fees and taxes, and how that's impacted the ability to build purposeful rental housing has made development, in most circumstances, not pencil. And you mentioned rising rents, dropping rents and rising vacancies in some markets. We would contend that's what healthy markets do. That's supply and demand. That's what we're seeing. We're seeing, more supply than there were people looking. And so that, of course, has corresponding impacts on rents coming down and vacancies going up. So we think that's healthy. That's what healthy markets should be able to do when they're allowed to. But going forward, I think we should all be concerned about the fact that we do not see a lot of, and whether you talk to Richard Lyle at Rescon or Dave Wilkes at Build or myself, I think we all share a similar view, which is there's not a lot coming. And I think the next few years, 26 and 27, we're not going to see very much coming online. And that's going to be a real problem for people looking for housing.
I had Richard Lyle from Rescon on my show on Monday night this week, and he said that
Yeah.
that taxes on housing, and I guess he wasn't discerning between rental versus condos, were 31% of the cost of building. And he said that development fees in Toronto had gone up by 1,000% in 15 years. Is that true?
Yeah, absolutely. And so you've seen a number of communities like Toronto and others where their DCs have gone up by these eye-popping amounts. And, I think whether it's someone like me who works in this space or whether it's someone who doesn't, you just have to say why. Like, why everything is more expensive. I think we all understand that. But to that degree, what has happened that has caused development related infrastructure to go up by that much? And so that Richard is right. And obviously over the last number of months, we've started seeing whether it's Mayor Del Duca and Vaughan, Mayor Brown. Mayor Brown asked me to come and meet with his council and staff at a workshop to talk about a DC bylaw, DC reduction bylaw, which the council in Brampton passed within the last couple of weeks. That is going to bring DCs down for the rest of this term of council. So we're starting to see, and I think Burlington's done something similar. So we're starting to see municipalities recognize, I think, what is going on here, which is nothing is going on, and that government fees and charges are a big part of the problem. And so we're now starting to see action at the municipal level. I applaud that. That is very, great for those municipalities who have done that. And we will see that will certainly make a difference in terms of trying to get some projects going that couldn't go otherwise.
CMHC, I think a year ago, said that we need 3.5 million more homes in Southern Ontario if we're going to get to any level of affordability. And that was more homes than we'd otherwise want to build anyway, or would otherwise build. Premier Ford, I think, called it 1.5 or 1.8 million additional homes that we needed to get to a level of affordability. Building starts are down dramatically. Building permits are down dramatically. People are putting developments on hold. If we don't have government action, what's going to happen?
If we don't have government action, certainly within my membership, I mean, sure, some projects will still happen. Some will still be able to move forward because, they own the land, because they are able to make it work. Maybe it's a community where there are no DCs. Like there are certain, communities where projects will still go forward, or they will still have the potential to go forward. But, without whether it be government intervention, well, I would say government intervention coupled with things like interest rates continuing to come down, and I think confidence in the economy, which I think we would, probably many people right now are not very confident about their economic prospects. We need people to feel better about their economic situation. So there are some tangibles and there's some intangibles, but I think we need a combination of those things to happen to be able to see projects going forward. And if we don't, then I think it's going to be a very, a very difficult period for the next number of years. I'm sure Richard talked to you about job losses. We're seeing trades being laid off. That's not good for the economy. We're seeing companies lay off development teams, people within their organizations who work on new development. So none of that's good for the economy. So of course there are all the sort of knock on or sort of effects when one thing goes sideways, other impacts from that. So none of this is good for, I think, our economy and for building the homes that we need, as CMHC and Premier Ford and others have talked about. Lots of numbers out there. The bottom line is they're all big. It doesn't matter what number you follow. They're all big in terms of what the need is. And right now, I have people say to me, come on, rents are down, vacancies up, problem solved. We're good. What's the problem here? You need to look out. You need to look out at what's going to happen. Sure, immigration is down. We know the changes, the adjustments are made in immigration and international students. Presumably, that's not going to be a forever thing, and inevitably, we will need more housing. We just will. So, I don't. I would say to anyone who thinks that we're okay now because of some of these things we're seeing with respect to rents and vacancies, for example, that's not we're not okay. We will need to continue to build, and we know it takes many years for projects from the first instance to when they're actually completed. All of that takes time, and I think part of what got us into this problem in the past was we didn't have that forward thinking. People weren't looking out ahead far enough to understand what the need was going to be, and we were too focused on what was in front of us, and sort of lulled into a false sense of security. And then we realized that that wasn't where we were at all. And we don't want to have that happen again. Not that we're out of anything right now, but I think we don't want to be in a situation where we think that we're in a situation that we're really not in, and then it becomes far worse, 5, 6 years from now.
CMHC and Stats Can came out with a report, I think a couple of months ago, maybe 6 or 9 months ago, saying that the time to get approval for developments in Canada was the slowest in the Western world. And that Toronto, Mississauga, Victoria, Vancouver were the slowest cities in Canada. And that there's something about our regulatory system that just adds reports and red tape and community meetings and things like this, such that it takes longer to actually get projects approved than it does to actually build those projects. Do you think that makes any sense?
I think that I've been doing this kind of work now for a little over about 7 years, and certainly much of that time, whenever people say to me, "What's the problem? What's the issue here about getting rental housing built?" And my answer would always be the same. It would be time and money. So we've talked about some of the economic challenges, but time has always been a big issue, and so you've touched upon that. And so when it takes years to get through the development approval process to actually be able to pull permits, we know that's far too long. I think most people know or would agree that's far too long. It shouldn't take years to get through this process. The number of background studies that are needed, the amount of commenting bodies who all want to have a say in what you're approving, the number of community meetings, all of these things add time and time and time. And then you have cases where lack of planning staff. So there's and someone goes on vacation, then your file sits in a drawer for 4 months. I mean, these are things that really do happen. And of course, automation. There's still a lot of communities that rely on pen and paper, and the Housing Accelerator Fund was supposed to help with that. That was the Trudeau government brought forward. That was supposed to help municipalities who received money through that program to do things like bring in automation, bring in technology to help, expedite the approval process. So, we have seen improvements, I think, overall. But you've pointed out there are still communities where it takes too long. And I think Save Toronto reported some months ago that things were a whole lot better, and I think it was a planner who said, well, or someone who's sort of works. It was someone who's I think former Altus Group, someone who used to work at Altus Group, who's a planner who said, like a lot of those applications are getting denied, so it might be faster, but doesn't mean that they're getting approved. It just means they're getting through applications more quickly. It doesn't mean they're actually getting to yes. So, you always have to look, I think, dig a bit deeper into some of these reports to say what is really going on here. I do think we're seeing, approvals overall happen more quickly. And of course, now we're in a situation where, even if you did get approvals happening, and we still need to make this better, but even if you got all the approvals that you needed much more quickly, of course, now the problem is we can't build. So it is a bit of a catch-22 in that sense. But I think assuming that it won't always be this tough to build, we all, I think, want to be in a place where it's not as difficult economically to make pro formas work. Then we need an approval process that actually is more timely, and it shouldn't be taking years. It should be taking. Well, I mean, obviously that's subjective in terms of what it should be taking, but I don't think 3 or 4 years is an amount of time that most people would say is reasonable. So there is still work to do there to get this process happening more quickly.
So I don't understand something, and maybe you can help me. You represent these companies that are building purpose-built rental accommodation, and so you've met, hopefully, and know a lot of these developers and these companies. If we need, as a society, all this regulation, or at least we think we need all this regulation, it must be because we don't trust the developers are going to build something that is high quality, attractive, functional, etc. When you think about the regulation we have in the pharmaceutical business, you have it because you want to make sure that the drug works before and is safe before such time as you put it on the market, which makes sense, and I think that is understandable. But if someone is going to build a building that is unattractive and of low quality, it's not going to get rented or sold, one would think. And so why is it that we need this regulation in the real estate business? Why isn't the market sort of self-correcting and make sure that developers, or are developers just really on average bad people that will always produce bad product unless the regulators make sure they produce good product?
Well, that's a really interesting question that you pose. I mean, in terms of why do we need government regulation? And, I'm not aware of a lot of examples, or really any examples that I can think of, of an apartment building that costs hundreds of millions of dollars to build, that then at the end of that, we find out that, there are, serious issues, structural, or, that the building is falling down or something. I mean, to your point, these are big projects, big dollars, investors required, CMHC's involved, and in fact, for us, CMHC, the Apartment Construction Loan Program, and the and MLI Select Mortgage Loan Insurance Program are vital programs to get our buildings built. So a lot of oversight, a lot of eyes. I don't know that I think that we are, the regulation exists to ensure that the buildings are built well. When you go back to, look at Ontario, 1970s, I mean, the first time the regulation really became a thing was when the Davis government introduced rent control. Why did they do that? They did that because obviously there were concerns with affordability and wanting to sort of address that through rent control. And so, over time, we've now obviously had that for several decades since. And I think there are many, you could have a conversation about that in and of itself, about how the rent control system has been changed and, modified. And, I would say it's continues to be sort of tinkered with in order to try to achieve whatever ends people want it to achieve. But I would say that there are a lot of issues around that, especially when you have now a product where government is controlling the revenue that you can derive from it, but they're not controlling expenses. But that's a whole nother conversation. But that's really, I think so much of what we kind of deal with. On the development side, yes, there's everything in terms of all the, site plan and all the studies and urban design and parking minimums and all things that we know. Why are all those things there? I mean, that's there are many people, I guess, that could be asked that question. I think inevitably over time, governments, we see governments sort of expand and in many industries, regulation might start in one place and then over time it just gets more and more and more people want to be involved or have a say, or frankly, constituents, talk to, elected officials and think that more oversight, more regulation is needed. Frankly, I think there's way too much of it in this space, and I think that if there were less, I don't think it would have any impact on the quality of the buildings. Like, I don't think that's what this is about.
So
I think it's,
regulators think that they need to provide guidance, if not guidance, frankly, rules on the amount of
mm,
amenity space per square foot that you've got to have for the number of units that you're going to build, the number of
mhm.
bike racks that you're going to have, the number of EV
Yep,
chargers that
yep,
you're going to have. I could go
absolutely.
on. The amount of
Yes.
regulatory requirements that developers have. It would assume that they're not very smart and that they've got to be told by government regulators what to have. Is that your experience, or do you think the market would tell them how many bike racks they should have? Like if
I
people
think the market, I think, yeah,
go ahead, sir.
sorry, I think the market would tell them. I think the market would tell them. I think the market would tell them. I think it does tell them. There's been a big push over the last many years to reduce or eliminate parking minimums. That's because, building operators and owners were recognizing in certain areas people aren't driving as much. So the requirement to have all these parking spaces, very expensive to build, underground parking. And so I think that's an example of one where the market was speaking. It was becoming very obvious to owners and developers that that was not something that was needed, not to the extent that it was being required. And I've been in buildings as well where you mentioned bike racks. They're all there. And, again, this was one example. Not going to say it's representative of every building, but I've been in buildings where they aren't used all that much, or there's so much, way more was there than is needed. So I think the market would speak to it, and I think developers would be responsive to that. And so much regulation adds cost, additional and additional sort of time and cost, and ultimately that's borne obviously by the end user of the product. And if it's not needed, then why do we have to have it? So I think the market would speak and developers would listen and they would modify and adjust accordingly.
I think it's absurd that regulators think that they've got to provide so much regulation for almost every little aspect of building a building. And I've been involved in numerous different industries in my career. I have found more regulatory influence and regulation in the housing business, which a lot of people think of as sort of a freewheeling, free enterprise kind of a sector, than any other industry I've been in. I've been in the entertainment business, the pharmaceutical business, the biotech business, the beer business, the shopping center business, lots of different businesses. None of them, other than maybe the pharmaceutical business, where I think it's completely appropriate to have that regulatory impact, have the amount of regulatory discretion, regulation, rules, demands. And one of the most ludicrous ones that was pointed out to me recently was green building codes in Toronto that are
Yes,
different than you've got in the 905. And one developer told me this is ludicrous. So the city of Toronto thinks they're going to solve climate change south of Steeles and not north of Steeles. Like you're not going to solve climate change south of Steeles. Like you either got to pass it everywhere, or admit that it's not going to have any impact. It's just going to make housing more expensive. We're going to take a break for some messages and come back with our guest Tony Irwin, president of the Rental Housing Association, in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio. I've got Tony Irwin. He is the president and CEO of the Rental Housing Canada Association. You're also another organization. What's the other organization, sir? The Federation of Rental Housing or something?
Federation of Rental Housing Providers of Ontario. So one is provincial and one is federal. So we do the same kind of work, but obviously different levels of government. And you were talking about government involvement. And of course, every level of government's involved in this industry. So it's important that we have a voice everywhere. And I just happen to run both the Ontario Association and the federal.
I got to ask you a couple of other policies that have been talked about, and whether you have any opinion or whether your association has any opinion. One of the big
Sure.
controversies that took place recently in Toronto was this regulation on sixplexes, and the sixplexes were something that the federal government was trying to get Toronto to pass, such that they get
Mhm.
some of the infrastructure monies because they thought that that would be good for housing supply. That small developers would buy up small houses or lots and build a duplex, a triplex, a quadplex, or a sixplex on that. And they wanted to make it
Mhm.
easier for them to do it, and so they wanted the city of Toronto to pass it as of right. The old former
Yep.
city of Toronto passed it, but all of the other cities that used to make up metropolitan Toronto, that are sort of the outer cities in the current city of Toronto,
Yep.
did not. Was that a good decision or a bad decision in your mind?
I think it's a bad decision. I mean,
Why?
we need options. We need, whether whether a lot of it gets built or not a lot of it gets built. At this point, we need housing to be built, and so I think we need people to say yes to building housing and yes to building rental housing. And I within my association, because I'm my members are more larger and sort of medium sized REITs and pension funds and corporations. They're not necessarily going to be building sixplexes. But there are developers out there who would do that, and I think we need that. So I support it. I think it's something that should be supported. And I, do I think it's going to happen on every corner? No, I don't think it would. But why wouldn't we want to make it easier for somebody who wants to build? I mean, I think we know why, but I'm asking the question. I think we should be supporting that as of right. We're not talking about a 40-story tower as of right, although I have opinions on that too. But in this case, I think it's something that should have been supported. I think it was was not a good decision to not
The,
support
the,
it.
the criticism or the con was that it would change the fabric of our suburban neighborhoods, and that we don't want rooming houses in our suburbs. We don't have these big monster homes with a whole bunch of undesirable people living in rooming houses in our neighborhoods. The opposite point of view was, no, they're not going to be built everywhere. They're going to be built probably on
I don't
major
know.
arterials, probably close to transit stations, and more than likely, no one's going to be able to buy an expensive single-family dwelling. It's going to be the older facilities that are going to be cost-effective to buy, to then take down and build into to something that's a tri, quad, or sixplex. Where do you come out on that?
That's my view. My view is the latter. 100% what you said at the end. That's exactly what I think would happen. There are lots of areas, whether they're underutilized, like old strip malls, or there's all kinds of different places where you could potentially do that. It's not going to happen everywhere. So I agree with your latter characterization. And that's why I think it's something that should be supported. We're not going to see it happening on every street, and it's not. That's just not that. That's an alarmist point of view. I don't think that would happen. So I agree with your sort of, the characterization of it being in certain places, sort of transit and your transit areas, certain lots where frankly they're being underutilized right now. I think it makes sense to do it there, and that's what I would expect would happen.
The province of Ontario and the city of Toronto about a month ago came out with an announcement that they're going to actually pass sometime in October the major transit station area districts, which are areas around all the major transit stations for the GO
Yeah.
train and for the subway and for the Ontario line and for the LRT, etc. But they didn't go very far. They didn't do sort of as of right density. If an area, even within that transit station area, was zoned neighborhood, they were still going to be zoned neighborhoods. You would still have to go back and apply if you wanted to change it to mixed use. So, what do you think about this major transit MTSA, major transit station area initiative? Is it the right initiative? Did they go far enough or not far enough? What's your sense of that?
I think it's good. I think it's a good, we're making progress on it, but I'd like to see them go further. I mean, I think we really need to be, embracing more density in these zones, in these nodes. Like we just need to get on with saying, look, we're a world-class city. We need to provide housing for people. There are certain places and spaces where it absolutely makes sense to, in these MTSAs to me is exactly where it should be. So I think there do need to be. I think what we're seeing, it's certainly progress in the right direction, but I'd like to see it go further. I'd like to see there be more, more ability to build more density. I mean, this is going to take time to evolve, I'm sure, and just as development does. But I think we need to be more supportive and need to go further than what's been said so far.
Montreal has solved some of their housing problem because they made it easier to convert employment industrial lands into rental and or residential lands. And what they did is they increased the density from 1 times coverage to 9 times coverage for former industrial lands. And what's happened is, obviously when the industries are no longer economically viable, people have come in and bought what some people call the gray zone. So it's not the green zone, it's the gray zone. Have bought it up and have built residential condominiums, and some of them along the old Lachine Canal, and it's really quite attractive. Toronto's got an opposite strategy, and the opposite strategy is no, we want the employment lands to exist, and so therefore we're not going to allow you to convert employment lands to residential. We're going to make it very difficult to do so. Some people think that's good because that means there's going to be industry in Toronto and jobs in Toronto. Other people say, well, no, that's dumb because if you can convert that land into to residential, that would make a ton more sense. And people are only going to want that if there are jobs somewhere. And the amount of industrial jobs have gone down dramatically. So where are you? Should we be making it easier to convert former industrial lands to residential lands, or is the current policy that restricts it and says it has to stay employment lands the right strategy?
No, we need to make it easier. We've been long advocating for government to make it easier to convert these underused employment lands. The idea that industry is going to come back to some of these lands, I think we've seen enough. Enough time has passed to know it's not going to happen. We need housing. We need to unlock more land for housing, and certainly to me, underutilized employment lands that are sitting not doing anything. We absolutely need to make it easier to convert those lands to housing. Full stop.
Tell me what you think about the Greenbelt. Some people think the Greenbelt is pristine agricultural land, conservation land, and we need it for our environment, for our nature, for to protect farmlands, conservation lands, etc. Other people have said no. Parts of the Greenbelt are infrastructure ready, already serviced, and should be developed. And if we create this moat around Toronto, we're forcing all of our kids, if they want single-family homes, to move to the other side of the Greenbelt, too far away from jobs, and or they're going to move to Calgary. What do you think of that?
Well, I mean, when the Greenbelt issue was going on, it wasn't something that my members were, involved building, rental housing on it. So I was quite happy to kind of stay in my lane. But I mean, I think the truth of the matter is we do need to look at urban boundaries. We do need to look at, and we've seen this conversation happen, whether it was Hamilton or elsewhere. I think we have to look at urban boundaries and sort of have discussions around, whether we need to extend them. How do we do that? I know that's not Greenbelt necessarily, but I do think we have to, look at we if we agree or if we think it's important to prioritize the building of more housing, it is obviously a big conversation with many different points of view about how we go about achieving that. And I certainly think that there is room for more density in urban cores, more density along transit lines, more density along major arteries and thoroughfares, all of that. But is that where are we just going to focus on that? Well, no, I don't think that's the answer. I think that's part of the answer. But where else should we be looking at building housing? And so, to me, the Greenbelt is something that is probably not something that anyone politically is going to want to reopen anytime soon. So probably that's something that's going to be just left alone for a while. But I think that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be having conversations around where else do we think we need to build housing. And I don't think you can't you can't freeze sort of communities in time and say we're not going to go any further than what's already been approved. Yes, there are difficult conversations. Yes, there are sensitivities that have to be sort of taken into account. But if we are growing, which I think we are and will continue to, then we have to have honest and I think open conversations around where we're going to achieve bring the housing that's needed. And that means I think looking at some areas where right now it's not happening, and we have to say how can that make sense? How can we do it? How can we service the lands? Can that be done? Does it make sense? And I think that's what we need to be looking at, is saying what can that look like in different parts of the province where we think it makes sense. So that's what I would say.
One of the segments of the development industry that exists in the United States that doesn't really exist in Canada is rental single family homes. And you've got these institutional owners, developers that will build a whole subdivision and of single family homes and rent it out. Garden style apartments, townhouse developments, and like. And it doesn't really exist, or it doesn't exist to a large extent in Canada. And numerous politicians have complained and said, we don't want institutions buying a whole bunch of single family homes, etc. What do you think? Is that the right attitude or a wrong attitude? Would we be better off if we had institutions and developers coming in and building subdivisions and renting them out rather than selling them off, or would be worse off?
We do have some examples of that. I do know of some developers. I can think of an example in Saskatchewan where they, bought some land and they built. Now they made them two units within a home, but they were, all detached houses. Made them two units, and they're all rentals. And they were, the uptake was immediate, and they had them all rented very fast because people like the idea of living in a home. It's like a single family home with lawn and all of that. They like that as opposed to living in mid-rise or or a plex or a high-rise or whatever the case may be. So that was a very popular option, and they're looking at doing more of that. But you're right, it's not something that we have a lot of. So there's that scenario, or there's this scenario, as you said, where certainly in the United States, where you see company coming in and buying up single-family homes and renting them out. So those are two different examples. I guess from my point of view, I think the example of building new housing and renting it out, like the example I was describing, I think that's great. I think that's another option. There are people who obviously like that kind of housing option. It's something they can afford, but it is a home as opposed to, other forms of rental accommodation. I think that's good. I think we should be encouraging more of that. As for the other, I mean, that's a more difficult conversation, I think, because we do need homes that people can afford to rent. It's not about picking one versus the other. It's about people having choice where they want to live in a budget that they can afford, and in a community or that provides sort of a community that they're looking to have. And so whether that's someone who is a developer that's building these kinds of accommodations and then renting them, whether it's someone who is buying homes and renting them out. I mean, I'm not the second example. I don't know that I really have an opinion on that. I think what's most important is having options for people that work for them. And I think being able to have different kinds of housing options is really what's most important. And you talked about earlier condominiums and versus rental and family sizes and all of that. One of the big I hear this from housing advocates is that in fact condos or apartments are not suited for families. So that's something that you were talking earlier about having Adrian Roca on talking about that. That is something that we also need to be addressing, whether it's in new apartment buildings or in other types of rental accommodation, but that are more suited to families because frankly, that's I think really what is needed going forward, and there's not enough of that available today.
I think we have, as a society, for some reason, this negative bias against rental or renters and positive toward home ownership. And for some reason, we think homeowners, take care of their homes better than renters or something like this. I don't know if that's true, and I certainly don't think it's true. I'd be interested if there's studies in that regard. But the counter to that in Europe and the United States and elsewhere is that people that rent are more mobile. and so therefore adjust to changes in the economy, changes in job opportunities, et cetera, more readily, and that's better for the economy. And so that there's pros and cons to both strategies. And I think you're right that we just need more options, and to have all the incentives for one and restrictions against the other makes no sense. Tony Irwin, thank you very much, President and CEO of Rental Housing Canada, for joining us today. This has been an interesting conversation, and I think it's one that we really got to have, because I think we do have a housing crisis, and I think we've sort of masked this housing crisis over the last couple of years by this, incredible boom in pre-construction condos that I think is over now, and what it's led to is a huge plethora of these condos being rented out, which isn't really the solution for the rental sector of our society that we need to have. And I think that rental sector, which isn't going to be all of the housing, but it's going to be a certain portion of the housing, should be purpose-built rental, which is the people that are part of your association. So thank you so much for joining us and chatting about some of these issues.
My pleasure. Thanks very much, Brian. Great conversation.
That's our show for tonight, everybody. Thank you for joining. I remind you, I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. You can stream me online at www.saga960am.ca. All my podcasts and videos go up on my website, briancrombie.com, on my YouTube channel, and on podcast servers and in social media as soon as the radio show goes to air. Thanks, everybody. Good night.